It all started with small, almost insignificant changes in Karen's behavior. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that there was nothing out of the ordinary. But the more I paid attention, the more I noticed things that just didn't add up. Karen had always been the type of person who thrived on routine. For as long as I could remember, her days had a certain rhythm to them: work, picking up Lisa from school, taking her to swim practice, and then coming home to have dinner with me. We'd always been a close-knit family, the kind where plans were rarely made without consulting each other, and where evenings were spent together, either watching a movie, cooking dinner, or helping Lisa with her homework. That's why it was hard to miss when things started to shift. It began subtly. She started coming home later, after Lisa's swim practices. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes practice ran long, or the other parents would get caught up chatting with the coach. No big deal. But it wasn't just once or twice, it became a pattern. I would ask her, "How was practice today?" And she'd respond quickly, vaguely, "Oh, fine, just ran a little late." She never offered more detail than that, and I could feel the distance growing, even in these short exchanges. It was like she didn't want to talk about it. Then there were the excuses. The odd, ill-timed reasons for why she didn't want me to come to Lisa's practices anymore. We had always gone together, cheering Lisa on from the stands and proud parents supporting our daughter. But Karen started suggesting that maybe I didn't need to come every time. "You don't have to go to every practice," she'd say, her voice too casual. "I'm sure you've got things you need to do." Or, "It's just a practice, nothing special. Why don't you take a night off?" At first, I didn't see the harm in it. Maybe she was right. I could stay home, get some work done, or relax. But then it happened again. And again. Every time I suggested coming along, she found some reason why I shouldn't. Sometimes it was because Lisa was tired, other times she claimed she needed to run errands afterward and didn't want me to be bored waiting around. It was always something, and while her reasons were plausible enough on the surface, something about the way she said them made me feel uneasy. The phone was the next clue. Karen had never been overly attached to her phone before. She would leave it lying around the house, on the kitchen counter, or in the living room. She wasn't one of those people who constantly checked it, and she never cared if I picked it up to check the time or read a message for her. But recently, her behavior changed. She began keeping her phone close to her at all times, like it had become an extension of her hand. It was subtle at first. I'd notice her texting a little more often or swiping away notifications whenever I entered the room. But then it escalated. She started keeping it on silent. Every time. It was strange. We never used to bother with silencing our phones at home, there was no need. But Karen's phone stopped ringing, buzzing, or making any noise at all. It was always in her pocket, or face down on the table if she had to set it down. And the few times I casually asked about it, she'd brush me off. "Oh, I just don't want to be distracted," she'd say, smiling, but her tone felt forced, rehearsed. And it wasn't just the phone. Sometimes she would be in the middle of texting, then suddenly stop the moment I entered the room. Her fingers would freeze, and she'd quickly lock the screen, sliding her phone into her pocket with a quick, awkward movement, as though trying to make it seem natural. The whole thing was anything but natural. The excuses, the late nights, the secrecy with her phone. It all began to form a picture in my head, one that I didn't want to acknowledge. I wanted to believe that it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking everything. But deep down, a gut feeling told me something was wrong. And that feeling kept growing, gnawing at me, refusing to let me rest. Looking back, I realize how many signs there were, and how obvious it all was. But at the time, I was still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, we had been together for years, and I loved her. I didn't want to believe that there could be anything going on behind my back, that the life we had built together could be threatened. So I pushed the suspicions down and buried them under layers of rationalization. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe she needed some space. But deep inside, I knew that something was changing, and not for the better. It was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. One evening, I was alone at home. Karen had taken Lisa to her swim practice, and I was relaxing in front of the TV, flipping through channels. The remote, however, was nowhere to be found. I searched the couch cushions and checked the coffee table, but still, no luck. I was about to give up and watch something on my phone when I remembered that Karen often tossed random things into her handbag. It wouldn't be the first time she'd thrown the remote in there absent-mindedly. I picked up her bag, which was resting on the kitchen counter, and began rummaging through it. As I sifted through receipts, a pack of gum, and some old grocery lists, my fingers brushed against something cold and sleek. I pulled it out, expecting to find the remote, but instead, I was holding her phone. Normally, this wouldn't have meant anything. I might have set it aside, not giving it a second thought. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was because I'd already been feeling uneasy for weeks, my mind circling with suspicions about Karen's strange behavior. Maybe it was because I knew she had been acting secretive with her phone, always keeping it close and never letting it out of her sight. But here it was, lying in my hands. Unlocked. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to do it. Snooping through someone's phone felt wrong, invasive even. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly collecting all those little red flags, was screaming for me to look. After all, if there was nothing to hide, I couldn't find anything, right? So, with a mix of dread and determination, I opened her messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Conversations with friends, family, work colleagues. But then, I saw a name that made my stomach churn: Jim. Jim was Lisa's swim coach. We'd met him countless times at practices and competitions. He seemed like a nice enough guy, always professional and focused on the kids. I had no reason to suspect him. Until now. I opened the thread between Karen and Jim, and almost immediately, I felt my heart sink. The messages started innocent enough. Small talk about Lisa's progress, practice schedules, and logistics. But as I scrolled up, the tone changed. There were jokes, casual flirting, and comments that seemed a bit too personal. And then, the further I went, the more explicit the messages became. Compliments about Karen's appearance, suggestive remarks, things that no married woman should be discussing with another man, let alone her daughter's coach. One message, in particular, hit me like a punch to the gut. It was from Jim, sent just a few days earlier. "I can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible. I can't wait to see you again." Karen responded almost immediately. "Same here. It was amazing. Let's be careful though, I don't want Mike to suspect anything." My hands shook as I stared at the screen, rereading those words over and over again. I don't want Mike to suspect anything. It was like a dagger twisting in my chest. There it was, clear as day. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. They were having an affair, and she was hiding it from me. And Jim, the man we had trusted to coach our daughter and to be a part of our lives, was betraying me right alongside her. I put the phone down, my head spinning. My heart raced, and I felt a rush of emotions all at once: anger, sadness, disbelief. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me, to our family? I thought about all the times she'd lied. All the moments she'd pushed me away, telling me not to come to practices or asking me to stay home. It all made sense now. Every excuse, every late night, every secretive glance at her phone had been leading to this moment. I felt like a fool. But amidst the hurt and betrayal, another feeling started to bubble up. It was darker and colder. It was the need for revenge. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, to wait until she walked through the door and demanded answers. I wanted to scream, to throw her phone at her, to make her explain herself. I could already imagine the confrontation, the yelling, the tears, the accusations flying back and forth. But then, something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock of the discovery, or maybe it was something deeper inside me that didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I realized that confronting her right away would be too easy for her. A fight would give her the chance to defend herself, to lie, to weasel her way out of it. I didn't want that. I wanted something more. At that moment, a new idea began to form in my mind. I didn't just want to end things with her. No, that would be too simple. I wanted to make her feel the same humiliation, the same betrayal, that I was feeling now. I wanted both of them, Karen and Jim, to understand what it was like to be blindsided, to have their dirty little secret ripped out into the open for everyone to see. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make it public. I was going to expose them in a way that they would never forget. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing, thinking about how I could turn this betrayal into something more than just a confrontation. I had the advantage now. They didn't know I knew. And that was power. I realized that if I played my cards right, I could make them both feel the same helplessness, the same gut-wrenching fear that comes with knowing everything could fall apart in an instant. I wasn't going to act out of anger. No, I was going to act with cold, calculated precision. And in that moment, I made my decision. I would not just end this. I would destroy it. The idea came to me like a flash of lightning, sudden and intense. It was a moment of clarity amid the storm that had been swirling in my mind since I found those messages. The perfect opportunity to set my plan into motion. I had just learned that Lisa's upcoming swim competition was not only one of the biggest of the year but also one where Jim, her coach, would be responsible for presenting the awards to the winners. The irony was too perfect to ignore. The man who had been betraying me behind my back, who had been sneaking around with my wife, would be standing in front of everyone, proud and unsuspecting, in a place of honor. This was my chance. I could already envision how it would unfold. Instead of the quiet, private confrontation that most people might expect, I would create a moment that they would never forget. It wouldn't just be a revelation, it would be a public spectacle. A humiliation they couldn't escape. And I knew exactly how to do it. First, I needed to create a reason for everyone important in our lives to be there. Our friends, our family, our colleagues, all of the people who mattered. No one would miss Lisa's big event, but that wouldn't be enough. I needed to take it a step further, to make sure everyone gathered afterward, ready for the grand finale. So I started planning a party. Under the guise of celebrating Lisa's success, I organized a post-competition get-together. Something that would seem like a natural progression from the swim meet, a proud father throwing a celebration for his daughter's achievements. No one would question it. Everyone would come, thinking it was just another family event, filled with laughter, toasts, and congratulations. I sent out invitations to our closest friends, extended family, and a few of my colleagues from work who had always been supportive of Lisa's swimming career. I made sure to act like it was just another proud parent moment, letting everyone believe that my only concern was celebrating Lisa's accomplishments. Of course, I made sure that Karen was involved in the planning. I wanted everything to seem as normal as possible. She even helped me choose the caterer, going through menus and picking out decorations for the party. The whole time, I played the part of the loving husband, not giving her the slightest hint that I knew what she had been doing behind my back. Every time I caught her smiling, seemingly carefree, it only fueled my determination. She had no idea what was coming. I made sure that Jim would be there, too. As Lisa's coach, it would be expected for him to attend, to celebrate her success alongside the rest of us. He had no reason to suspect anything. Why would he? I had played my role perfectly, acting as the supportive parent at every practice and every competition. I knew he thought he was in the clear. They both did, and that was what made it all the more satisfying, knowing that they were completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Over the next few weeks, I watched them carefully. Every interaction, every moment they spent together, I analyzed it all with a sharp, focused eye. Karen, despite the growing tension between us, still tried to act like everything was fine. She would kiss me goodbye in the mornings, ask me how my day was when I got home, and laugh with me at dinner like nothing was wrong. But I could see the cracks. Every time her phone buzzed and she turned away from me to read a message, I knew who it was. I knew what they were talking about. They were too confident, too comfortable in their little affair. It was almost amusing, in a sick way, watching how oblivious they were to the fact that I was onto them. Karen thought she had me fooled, but she underestimated just how much I had seen. She continued to make excuses to stay late after Lisa's practices, saying she needed to talk to Jim about training schedules, upcoming meets, and other things that a good parent would find important. She still suggested I didn't need to come along, saying I deserved some time to myself after work. The same tired excuses, the same lies. But I let her think it was working. I didn't question her, didn't push back. Instead, I pretended to go along with it, giving her more than enough rope to hang herself. Jim, on the other hand, was as smug and self-assured as ever. At every practice, he was the picture of professionalism, encouraging the kids, giving them pointers, and praising Lisa for her hard work. No one would have suspected a thing. But now and then, I would catch a glance between him and Karen. A quick, almost imperceptible exchange that most people wouldn't even notice. But I noticed. Every touch of his hand on her arm, every smile that lingered just a little too long, it was all clear to me now. They thought they were being careful, but to me, their secret was glaringly obvious. The more I watched, the more their arrogance disgusted me. They believed they could carry on with their affair, right under my nose, without consequence. It made my resolve even stronger. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about showing them both that their actions had real, painful consequences. I wanted them to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same humiliation, that I had felt the moment I read those messages. Each practice, each casual lie Karen told me, was like adding fuel to the fire. I didn't confront them. I didn't let on that I knew. Instead, I observed, collected evidence in my mind, and sharpened my plan. I watched how they grew bolder and more comfortable in their deceit, thinking they had me fooled. And every time they smiled at each other behind my back, it only solidified my desire to bring them crashing down in the most public, devastating way possible. The stage was set. The date was approaching. Everything was in place. They thought they had won, that they were in control of the situation. But what they didn't know was that I had already planned their downfall. And it was going to be spectacular. The day of the competition finally arrived. It was a day that had been looming in my mind for weeks, like a storm on the horizon, growing larger and more powerful with each passing moment. But today, I felt eerily calm. I had spent so much time preparing, carefully plotting every detail, that when the morning came, I was ready. I slipped into my role with ease, like an actor stepping onto a stage for a performance he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Today was going to be a show, and I was the one pulling the strings. The pool was buzzing with energy. Swimmers were stretching, parents were chatting, and the faint sound of water splashing filled the air as some kids warmed up in the lanes. I arrived with Karen and Lisa, acting the part of the proud, supportive husband and father. My face was a mask of cheerfulness, my smile wide and genuine, or at least, it appeared to be. I greeted friends and family who had come to support Lisa, shaking hands, clapping people on the back, and making small talk. I joked with my colleagues who had come to watch, talking about how much time Lisa had spent training for this moment. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would have seemed like I was just another proud dad at his daughter's big event. No one could have guessed the storm brewing inside me. Jim was there too, of course. As the coach, he moved around the pool deck with the same air of confidence I had seen so many times before. He was in his element, giving last-minute instructions to the kids, offering encouragement, and laughing with the other coaches. He seemed relaxed, almost carefree. And why wouldn't he be? In his mind, everything was going according to plan. He had no idea that today wasn't just about the competition. Watching him interact with the kids, you'd never guess what kind of man he truly was. To everyone around, Jim was the perfect coach, dedicated, focused, and always willing to go the extra mile for his team. He played his part well. But now, as I watched him, knowing what I knew, it made my skin crawl. The ease with which he carried himself, the way he acted as if nothing was wrong, made me all the more determined to see my plan through to the bitter end. Karen, on the other hand, was a different story. She was trying to keep up the same facade, but I could see the cracks forming. She looked a little more tense than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Every time someone spoke to her, she responded politely, but there was a stiffness to her body language as if she was forcing herself to stay composed. It was subtle, but it was there, the nerves, the anxiety. I could see it in the way her fingers drummed lightly on her thigh, the way her eyes darted around the room, as though she was constantly checking to see if anyone was watching. I knew she was worried about Lisa's performance, but I also suspected there was something else eating away at her. Perhaps it was guilt. Maybe she had started to sense something, some small inkling that her web of lies was starting to unravel. Or maybe it was just the weight of the secrets she was carrying. Either way, I didn't let her nerves faze me. I smiled at her the way I always had, gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, and told her Lisa was going to do great. I kept my tone light, my expression warm. She didn't need to know what was coming. Not yet. As the competition began, I made my rounds, moving between family members, checking in with Lisa's grandparents, and laughing with her cousins. Everyone was in high spirits, excited to see Lisa compete, and to witness her hard work pay off. It was the perfect atmosphere for what I had planned. No one would suspect a thing. Jim was the same as always, professional, confident, and entirely too comfortable. He had no idea that he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed off. He joked with the other parents, complimenting the kids, and making everyone feel like they were part of something special. I watched him closely, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought this was just another day, another competition where he could play the role of the dedicated coach while sneaking around with my wife behind my back. Little did he know, today was going to be the day when everything came crashing down. As the races progressed, I clapped and cheered for Lisa like I always did. She swam beautifully, her strokes smooth and powerful, cutting through the water with ease. I was proud of her, genuinely so. No matter what was happening with Karen and Jim, Lisa was the innocent one in all of this. She didn't deserve to be caught up in the mess her mother had created. Today was her day, and I would make sure that she had no idea what was going on beneath the surface. But even as I cheered for her, my mind was already drifting to what would happen after the races were done. The awards ceremony. That's where everything would unfold. Jim would be standing there, ready to hand out the medals, basking in the glory of the moment, thinking he had the respect of everyone around him. And then, with everyone watching, I would make my move. I had rehearsed the moment in my mind so many times by now that it felt almost second nature. I could picture it clearly, the look of confusion on Jim's face, the shock on Karen's, and the collective gasp from the audience as they realized what was happening. It would be swift, brutal, and entirely unforgettable. I was ready for it. I had been preparing for weeks, and now, the moment was almost here. But for now, I had to wait. I had to keep playing my part, the proud father, the supportive husband. No one could suspect a thing. So I smiled, I laughed, and I cheered, all while knowing that everything was about to change. Today was the day it would all come to light. The moment Lisa touched the wall and won her category, the entire room erupted into cheers. The air was thick with the sound of clapping, whistles, and shouts of excitement. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched her climb out of the pool, smiling ear to ear, drenched but triumphant. She had done it, all the hard work. The endless hours of practice, it had all paid off. For a fleeting moment, I let myself feel nothing but pure joy for her. This was her moment, and she deserved it. As the noise settled and the athletes gathered for the awards ceremony, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Anticipation filled the space, and everyone was eager to see their children honored for their achievements. The medals, the applause, the speeches, it was all part of the tradition. But today, it wasn't just about the trophies. For me, this ceremony would mark something far more significant. This was where it would all come crashing down. Jim, as expected, was front and center. He approached the microphone with the same confidence and charm he always carried. His smile was wide, his posture relaxed, as if he were the king of his little kingdom, standing there in front of the crowd like the hero of the day. It made my stomach turn, watching him stand there as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't been sneaking around with my wife for God knows how long. But I kept my composure. I had waited this long, what was a few more minutes? Jim began speaking, his voice smooth and commanding. He praised the young athletes, talking about their dedication, their perseverance, and how proud he was of every one of them. The parents listened intently, nodding along, swept up in the feel-good moment of it all. He even mentioned Lisa by name, congratulating her on her incredible performance. His words were carefully crafted and polished, like they had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. The crowd ate it up, hanging on every word. But not me. All I could think about was what was about to happen next. As Jim finished his speech, the applause began again, and he stepped back from the microphone, ready to start handing out the medals. This was my cue. My heart pounded in my chest, but outwardly, I remained calm. I had to do this just right, no hesitation, no second guessing. I rose from my seat and made my way to the stage, weaving through the crowd with a smile on my face. People watched me, probably assuming I was just a proud father wanting to say a few words about my daughter. No one had any idea what was about to happen. When I reached the stage, I approached Jim and gestured toward the microphone, giving him a polite nod. "Mind if I say a few words about Lisa?" I asked, my voice steady, casual. He smiled, that same smug smile I had come to hate, and handed me the microphone without a second thought. The room quieted as I stood there, all eyes on me. The expectant silence hung in the air, thick with curiosity. I could feel the weight of it, the way everyone was waiting, anticipating another proud dad's speech about his daughter's achievements. But this wasn't just about Lisa. Not anymore. I looked out into the crowd, my gaze scanning over the familiar faces of friends, family, and fellow parents. They had no idea what was coming. I glanced at Karen, sitting near the front with a forced smile on her face, her hands resting nervously in her lap. I could see the tension in her posture, the way she tried to look calm but failed. She had no clue what was about to hit her. Then I turned my eyes to Jim. He was still smiling, oblivious, standing there like a man completely in control of his world. And then I spoke. First of all, I began, my voice warm, almost conversational. I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of Lisa. She's worked so hard for this, and today, she's shown all of us just what she's capable of. The crowd smiled, some nodding in agreement. I could feel the energy in the room. Everyone expected this to be another heartfelt moment. But I wasn't done. I paused for a second, letting the silence settle, and then I looked directly at Karen. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker there. Fear? Guilt? I wasn't sure, but it was enough to fuel the fire inside me. And of course, I continued, turning my attention to Jim. None of this would have been possible without the support of her coach. Jim. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, polite applause even. Jim smiled and gave a small wave as if he were some sort of local hero. Then, without missing a beat, I added, in fact, Jim has been so dedicated to our family that he's gone above and beyond in ways most of you could never imagine. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching as the crowd shifted, sensing that something was off. I could feel the tension starting to rise and could see the faint looks of confusion on people's faces. And then, I delivered the final blow. Let's raise our glasses, I said, my voice steady and clear, to Jim, the coach who cares not only about our daughter but also about her mother. For a second, there was nothing but silence. The room seemed to freeze, every eye locked on me in stunned disbelief. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, slowly, the weight of my words began to sink in. I watched as the realization spread across the crowd, and saw the shock ripple through them like a wave. Gasps filled the room, whispers of confusion and disbelief. I turned my gaze back to Karen, whose face had gone pale, her eyes wide with horror. She looked like she might faint, her hands trembling in her lap. Then I looked at Jim, and for the first time, I saw the smug confidence drain from his face. He stood there, frozen, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The silence in the room was deafening. My heart pounded in my chest, but I felt nothing but satisfaction. The moment I had been waiting for, planning for, had finally arrived. They had thought they could keep their secret, but now, in front of everyone, the truth was out. And there was no escaping it. The ceremony wasn't about awards anymore. It was about betrayal, and I had just laid it bare for all to see. The moment after my words hit the air, it felt like time stopped. For a split second, the room was locked in absolute stillness. My heart, which had been pounding moments before, slowed as I watched the scene unfold before me. It was as if I were outside my own body, observing everything in slow motion. And then, like a thunderclap after a lightning strike, the impact of my announcement settled in. I saw Karen first, her face drained of color, turning a shade so pale that for a moment, I thought she might faint. She blinked rapidly as if trying to process what had just happened, but her mind couldn't keep up. Her eyes, wide with shock and horror, darted around the room, desperately searching for something, an explanation. An escape, anything that could undo the moment. But there was no way out. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Her lips trembled, and then, slowly, she dropped her gaze to her lap, unable to meet my eyes or the eyes of anyone else in the room. Her hands, which had been clasped tightly together, now shook slightly, and she wrung her fingers in her lap like a child caught in a lie. I had seen that look on her face before, a mixture of fear and guilt, of being utterly trapped. But this time, it wasn't just a small argument or misunderstanding. This time, there was no coming back from it. Next to her, Jim stood frozen. His body, which had been so relaxed and confident moments before, was now stiff and tense. His face, usually lit with that easygoing charm he wore like a mask, had gone completely blank. He blinked once, twice, as if he hadn't fully heard what I said, like his brain was rejecting the words. But the truth had landed, and it was clear that it had hit him hard. His eyes, once filled with that familiar cockiness, were now wide with panic. His mouth opened slightly as if he were about to speak, but nothing came out. For a man who always seemed to have the perfect words, who could charm a room full of parents with his smooth talk and confident demeanor, Jim was suddenly at a loss. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Karen. Instead, he stared straight ahead, as though he could pretend, for just a moment longer, that this wasn't happening. But his posture gave him away. His shoulders slumped, his arms hung awkwardly at his sides, and the faintest sheen of sweat had begun to form on his forehead. The mask had fallen, and there was nothing left of the cool, collected man he pretended to be. The silence that followed my words was deafening. The entire room had been thrown into a stunned, awkward paralysis. No one moved, no one whispered. It was as though the entire gathering had collectively held its breath, unsure how to react. The only sound was the faint hum of the pool's ventilation system. And even that seemed quieter than before. I glanced around, taking in the reactions of those closest to us. Some were staring at me, their expressions frozen in disbelief. Others had their eyes fixed on Karen and Jim, their minds slowly putting the pieces together. They might not have known the full story yet, but my words had given them enough to realize something was deeply wrong. My closest friends, those who had known us for years, were the first to start connecting the dots. I saw the way their faces shifted from confusion to understanding. A few of them exchanged glances, their eyes widening as the realization hit. You could see it on their faces, the way their eyebrows raised slightly, the subtle shift in their expressions. They were piecing it together, the late nights, the strange tension, the unspoken things that had been happening between Karen and me for months. Now it all made sense to them. Lisa's grandparents, who were seated near the front, looked completely dumbstruck. Her grandmother, who had always doted on Karen, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with shock. She looked at Karen with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment, as if the daughter-in-law she had always loved had suddenly become a stranger. Her grandfather, usually so stoic, just stared at the floor, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair tightly. He didn't need to say anything, the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air between them. And then, slowly, the whispers began. At first, it was just a few murmurs, quiet, uncertain. People leaned toward one another, sharing their thoughts in hushed voices, unsure of what had just transpired but knowing it was something big. The ripple effect spread quickly through the crowd. Parents, friends, and colleagues all began exchanging glances, whispering behind their hands, piecing together what my cryptic words truly meant. I could hear fragments of their conversations, though they tried to be discreet. Is he talking about Jim and Karen? Oh my God? The shock was palpable. This wasn't just a casual revelation. It was a bomb that had just exploded in the middle of an innocent celebration. And the fallout was immediate. As I stood there, the center of this storm, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. For weeks, I had been carrying the weight of this knowledge, the anger and betrayal boiling inside me. And now, it was finally out in the open. The truth was no longer mine to bear alone. It was shared and exposed for everyone to see. Karen sat there, still as a statue, her head bowed, her hands clenching and unclenching in her lap. She was too paralyzed by shame to move, too humiliated to speak. Jim, beside her, was in no better shape. His face had gone from blank to pale, as though the blood had drained from it entirely. He looked as though he wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and vanish from sight. But there was no escape. Not anymore. The room, still buzzing with quiet, shocked murmurs, had become a stage. And the two people at the center of it, the ones who had betrayed me, were now the unwitting stars of this disastrous show. After that evening, everything changed. The ceremony that had started as a celebration of Lisa's victory quickly turned into the end of life as we all knew it. There was no coming back from what had happened. The truth was out, and it was too big, too damaging to simply brush aside or pretend hadn't happened. As soon as the evening was over, the once friendly smiles, the laughter, the warmth from everyone in that room evaporated. All that was left was a cold, uncomfortable silence that would stretch far beyond that night. Karen, of course, tried to talk to me after we got home. I could hear the panic in her voice, and see the desperation in her eyes as she followed me through the house, her words spilling out in a frantic stream. She was trying to explain, trying to justify what had happened, as if there was any possible explanation that could undo the betrayal I had uncovered. I didn't mean for it to happen, she kept saying. It wasn't serious. It was a mistake. A mistake. That's what she called it. As if she had accidentally tripped and fallen into his arms. As if months of lies, deceit, and sneaking around could be brushed off as something small, something insignificant. The words, her excuses, they all bounced off me, meaningless. I had stopped listening the moment she opened her mouth. Whatever we had once been, whatever love or trust I had in her, it was long gone. Her voice became white noise, fading into the background as I packed a bag and left the house for the night. I didn't care what she had to say. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I had read the messages. I had watched them together, knowing all along what they were doing behind my back. The damage was done, and no amount of words could fix it. She could beg, she could cry, she could apologize all she wanted, but I was already miles away emotionally. I had been for weeks. As for Jim, he disappeared from the scene almost as quickly as I had exposed him. A few days after the ceremony, word got around that he had resigned from his position at the school. He didn't even have the guts to face the fallout or deal with the aftermath of his actions. I suppose that's what happens when your facade of charm and professionalism crumbles in front of an entire community. He couldn't handle the whispers, the side glances, the knowledge that everyone knew the truth about who he was. The school, of course, tried to keep things quiet. There were no public announcements, no official statements. But in a small town like ours, news spreads fast. People talked, and soon enough, everyone knew why the beloved coach had abruptly left his post. Parents exchanged knowing looks at the pool and whispered gossip in the school parking lot. Jim's reputation was ruined, and his career was in tatters. He had built his life on the respect and admiration of the community, and now that was gone. Swept away in the blink of an eye. As for me, I knew exactly what I had to do next. Filing for divorce was the easy part. I had already made my decision the moment I saw those messages on her phone. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. I wasn't the kind of man to forgive this kind of betrayal, and I certainly wasn't going to pretend everything was fine just to keep up appearances. My lawyer had the papers ready within a week, and the process began. Cold, methodical, and final, that's how I wanted it. Karen tried to fight it at first. She insisted that we could fix things, that we could go to counseling, and that Lisa didn't need to see her parents' marriage fall apart like this. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I had given her everything: trust, love, a family, and she had thrown it away for some cheap fling with a man who was supposed to be there to support our daughter, not tear apart her family. There was no fixing this. The divorce moved quickly. We agreed on the terms with minimal fighting. She could keep the house, I didn't want it anymore. It was full of memories, laughter, and love that had been tainted by her betrayal. I got my place, a small apartment across town where I could start over, far from the ghost of our broken marriage. Lisa, of course, was devastated. She didn't know all the details, I made sure of that, but she understood enough to know that her parents' relationship had been irreparably damaged. We sat her down together, Karen and I, and explained that we were getting divorced. Karen tried to play the victim as if she hadn't been the one who had shattered everything, but I stayed calm. Lisa didn't need the full truth yet. Maybe one day, when she's older, I'll tell her what happened. But for now, she just needed to know that her parents would still love her, even if they couldn't stay together. In the end, I got what I wanted. Not just revenge, but a sense of closure. Karen and Jim had thought they could keep their little secret hidden forever, that they could continue their affair without consequences. But I showed them that even the most well-guarded lies have a way of coming to light. And when they do, they can destroy everything in their path. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about showing them that they couldn't get away with it. No matter how carefully they had planned, no matter how sneaky they had been, their actions would catch up to them in the most public, humiliating way possible. They had been exposed, and there was no hiding from the truth.